Hello and welcome aboard the Silverwind. My name is Captain Tom, and we are joined by my co-host and intergalactic robot, Wilson. Well, not my intergalactic robot, but an intergalactic robot. And yeah, with that, we will be going to Mars today. So we're going to go ahead and go there because I think it's going to be a good planet to go to talk about the next chapter in the Bible that we are going to be reading, and that is chapter 7, which is all about the flood. So let's go ahead and make a nice little transition over there, plot our course, and that ought to do the trick. Okay, so let's see here. Make sure we do this right. There we go. All right. All right, Wilson, you can hit it. There it is. All right, so first things first, I just want to say that Mars, we've been to it before on the Friday show, and we had an opportunity to mess around with one of the, well, we'll lock into place there, with one of the craft that had been sent there that is called Opportunity. And it was Wilson's idea, basically, to run it off the cliff and give it a nice burial. But anyways, we won't rehash all of those old things. But one interesting fact about Mars I didn't talk about before is that there is a significant amount of water erosion that at least the pictures from Opportunity sent back. And yeah, so it's actually led to a lot of people believing that there are potentially either lakes, rivers, maybe even oceans on Mars at one point in time. And then some even believe that Mars had a catastrophic flood, worldwide flood, as you would say. So even a Harvard article stated this: Mars surface shaped by catastrophic flooding. So that might be a little difficult to believe, considering how little water is on the surface of Mars. There is some water at the polar caps of Mars. So there, in the form of ice, there is some water on Mars, but it seems to be all dried up if it was ever there. Now, as difficult as that might be to believe, it actually is a reasonable statement. And let's talk a little bit about what reason is in order to fully understand that. Now, oh, Julian, howdy to you as well. Thank you for joining us. So let's go ahead. I'm going to look over here to let's see, make sure I get the right screen up. There we go. Okay, so if you type into Google define reason, it's going to give you this right here: a cause, explanation, or justification for an action or event. Power of the mind to think, understand, or form judgments, process of logic. So the first one right here is going to be the better definition of this. It is basically, what this is simply saying is that you have something to support your conclusion, your statement. You have something to back it up. You can call that evidence. You can call that, what it says here is justification. But a premise for your conclusion, right? That's all that means. If your premises, or if your evidence is bad evidence, like it doesn't actually support your conclusion, that would be bad reasoning. And if you have nothing to support what it is that you're claiming, then that would be unreasonable because you have no reason behind it. So yeah, I think justification or evidence are really good for that. And oftentimes when we talk about reason, we also talk about logic, and I will be talking about it a lot today. And if you type into the dictionary or into Google the define logic, it is reasoning conducted to assess according to strict principles of validity. That's a bad definition right there. What are strict principles? That's vague. So vague definitions have no value, not really. So we're not going to even worry about that one. This one gets a little bit closer, and I'll explain it. A system or set of principles underlining the arrangement of elements in a computer or electronic device so as to perform a specific task. Now, what this is referring to is coding. And if you know anything about coding, you know that coding has to be very specific, that whenever I left click on an icon on the computer, the coding has to be arranged in such a way to where there's only one possible outcome, that application that icon is for opens up. Now, if doing that will open up multiple applications or do multiple things on the computer, it can cause the computer to freeze up or crash because the computer has to follow a logical path, meaning that there's only one possible answer to something, or one possible explanation. So let's go ahead and let me get you back over here to the bridge. All right, so that is the difference between reason and logic. Reason is having evidence or something to support what it is that you're asserting, and logic is where you can demonstrate that there's only one possible conclusion that could be made on something. And I think a good example of that right here, I got a couple of these things. Here we go. So this plus this equals this. That's all that 1 + 1 = 2 represents, and that is logical because there's no other explanation, right? There's no other possible conclusion to that. And that's really important when we're trying to discern whether or not something is true. A lot of people these days, it's very common for people just simply defer their thinking to someone else, a supposed expert or authority, and they say, well, that person says this, therefore it's true. The problem with that is that people can be wrong. Even experts can be wrong. So instead of authoritarian fallacy, the best way to determine what is true, what is closest to being true, and what is not true is if it can be backed up with good reasoning and be demonstrated logically. So we have right here at Mars, it is reasonable to say that there was catastrophic flooding on the surface of Mars, but is it logical? Well, you know what? There are other possibilities for why that erosion might be there. There could have been icy comets that, battered it at one point in time, and it had never had oceans before, but that may have caused water erosion and that water evaporated. It could also be that, it was just made that way, right? Like that is one of the contenders, it is related to what the Bible is saying here, that it was just put there that way. And who knows? I mean, God could have made this with a bunch of water on it and it has changed over time to this. Who knows, right? But there are other possible explanations. So we can say it's reasonable to say this, but not necessarily logical, which doesn't disprove it or anything. It's just a statement of fact, right? So if you could say reason and logic, if you could support something with both reason and logic, that's the closest you're going to get to truth on something. So what does that have to do with what we're going to talk about today? Well, today we're going to talk about the worldwide flood that is asserted here in the Bible. So that is a part of what the story is. The story makes no hint at this being a local flood. They go through great lengths to describe the picture of this as a global event. So that is what we're going to cover and talk about. And the same people who say that Mars flooded, a lot of those same people say it's not possible for Earth to have ever had a worldwide flood. Now, a few interesting things about that is that the Earth's surface is was it like 2/3 or 3/4 water? The 3/4? I'm wrong on both? Oh, well, apparently 71%. So the Earth's surface is 71% water, everybody. Yeah, I thought I heard someone say it was 3/4 once. Anyways, I guess that's close, but yeah, that's a lot of water. And yeah, I like to share a quote with you guys. So the late, I'm going to say this name wrong, but Jacques Cousteau, I think that's how you say it. I think it's French, but anyways, he said this. He was a famous kind of scientist and someone who studied marine biology and different things like that. Very big about the oceans. Were the crust of the earth to be leveled with great mountain ranges like the Himalayas and ocean abysses like the Mariana Trench, evened out, no land at all would show above the surface of the sea. Earth would be covered by a uniform sheet of water more than 10,000 feet deep. So overwhelming the ocean seems to be. And to that point, if you were to look at places in the ocean like the Mariana Trench or the Challenger Deep, which is a part of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of it, if you were to take those fissures in the ocean, and there's quite a few of them, and you were to close them up, well, that would push a significant amount of water up. Now, I don't know if that would be enough to go over the tallest mountains, but you would see some catastrophic worldwide flooding. So there's clearly enough water on the planet for a worldwide flood to happen. But could it happen by simple rain or anything like that? Well, we'd have to go to the details in the story in the Bible to see exactly how it describes this happened. And if what your thoughts are is that it just rained a bunch and it caused a worldwide flood, Well, that's not what the Bible story is describing. It describes a very different event than just simply it rained a bunch and then the whole earth was flooded, because clearly that wouldn't make sense. But I do want to cover a few things. Is it reasonable? Remember, we talked about this before, reason and logic. Is it reasonable to believe that the Earth could have had some kind of catastrophic worldwide flood in the past? So let's go ahead and to go into all of that. We're going to go to the reading room because I think I've got things prepared for while we are in there. So let's see here. Make sure we can transition over there. Wilson, I'm hurrying, Wilson. Don't rush me, all right? Let's see here. So we've got you're already turning us around. Okay, all right. I got the transition screen right here. Okay, I'll see you guys over in the reading room. All right, that wasn't so bad. Okay, here we are. Let's go ahead, and I would like to share some interesting facts with you guys. So there are quite a few different things that different scientists out there have pointed out to the possibility of or evidence of a worldwide flood. Now, keep in mind, with Mars, the only evidence is that it looks like there is water erosion in a lot of places where different rovers have been, such as Opportunity. And so with that, I would like to present the first thing here. So the fossil record has some pretty interesting stuff. Let's go ahead and look at that real quick. Here we go. Yeah. So this on the screen right here, these are fossilized clams. Very, very interesting. So what's so important about fossilized clams? Well, these clams are fossilized shut, and these are found all over the earth, including on top of very tall mountains, such as Mount Everest. There's actually a pretty big bed of these on Mount Everest, pretty like, I think it's somewhere in the higher half of it. And, you know, one of the explanations of this is that, you know, there is geological events, you have tectonic movements can push mountains up that were once under the sea, where sea life died, pushes it up, and now you have remains of sea life on top of mountains. The only issue with that is that in order to have a fossil, you would have to have some kind of rapid burial. Now, are there plenty of rapid burials that happen in the ocean, that sort of thing? Sure, they happen frequently here and there. There's different avalanches and stuff like that. But to have something fossilized like this, and for it to be so frequent they could be found all over the world, well, another explanation of that is a massive worldwide flood that would have a lot of moving sediment and would rapidly bury things. Because when a clam is, when it dies naturally, just say it was just died naturally in the ocean and the bed were to be raised up, well, the muscle inside would relax and deteriorate, and you would just have two halves of a shell. For it to be fossilized shut, it had to be rapidly buried. So that's one interesting thing right there, and it's definitely a claim that is brought up from time to time. There is also this right here. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys remember from Jurassic Park. You've ever noticed how, not all of them, but there are quite a few fossils, the ones that are intact, show the animal, raptor or otherwise, with its head bent back as far as possible, and its tail, it's almost like its tail is trying to touch its head. And the reason that an animal is fossilized this way is because, well, it died from asphyxiation or drowning. Now, when an animal drowns in the water, it's a very sad thing, but when it happens, they're usually the last moments, their back arches backward, and their head is trying to arch back, trying to get their head above the surface of the water. It's an involuntary response, and it's the last thing the body tries to do to survive. And then, after that, of course, if it's just water, the animal would relax. But clearly this happened when the animal was still in some kind of thick mud, right? So it was some kind of rapid burial in some kind of mud slurry, which would be something that would happen in a catastrophic flood event, tsunami or anything like that. And you have quite a few of these fossils all over the world, especially some where it looks like the animals were all herded into one spot trying to escape something. and they are all buried in mannerisms like this, or you have these bone graveyards where the bigger bones are in the bottom and the smaller bones are up top. So once again, another evidence of some kind of water catastrophe that led to fossilization. So let's see here. I'd like to show you guys something else here, which is pretty interesting. We have rock formations, which don't make a whole lot of sense if these things were formed over millions of years very, very slowly. The issue, here we go. The issue with this is that, well, when rock is hard, it doesn't bend. So tectonic plates move, there's movement of the earth, things like that. And if you're imagining that slowly but surely this rock just bent under the force of that pressure, hard rock doesn't do that. It's brittle. It breaks, it fractures if there's any kind of force that's put on it like this, especially enough to do this. And for it to be so many layers all being bent at the same time means that these had to be still malleable at the time that this movement happened. And so I got a few more examples here. Yeah, this stuff is found all over the place, and it's pretty crazy when you think about it. That these rocks had to have been still soft when they were, these layers at least, when they were pushed like this. Now, if you have a massive tidal event, and we're going to talk about what exactly it is that the Bible describes here, it's not talking about a gentle flooding. It's very catastrophic, extremely violent. Takes place over a long period of time, and there would be multiple, at least many people who study this project there would be many tidal events, tsunamis, all kinds of things happening, where there would be layer upon layer upon layer of different sediment thrown on top of one another over I wouldn't say like in the exact same moment, but over a short period of time considering. And then while all that stuff is still malleable, it's being bent and formed by the movement of tectonic plates that are moving rapidly during this catastrophe. And so with that, I would say that's pretty interesting stuff. I've seen those kinds of things before, never really thought too much about them, but with things like that, could we say it's reasonable to believe that there could have been a worldwide flood on the Earth? Well, it definitely would make it reasonable, but it doesn't necessarily make it logical, right? Same issue we have with the assertion about Mars. So there's other explanations for how these things could have happened. You've got the different layers in the earth, the different sedimentary layers. They don't show erosion between those layers, which doesn't really work in the favor of millions of years theory. Definitely leans more towards the flood theory on how those things were formed. But once again, these can lead to great debates, and they have plenty of debates online over these issues. And we're not here to make a conclusion on these, just letting you know that there is reason to back up these claims and whether or not you believe that's the case. But there is, of course, I want you guys to make up your own minds on this. But I will say, probably the most impressive, or the most I can't even think of the word for it right now. The most influential piece of evidence or reasoning that I would say is pretty logical, that actually does support the idea of a worldwide flood. I'll share that with you guys at the end after the show while we're on our way back to Earth. So I want to make sure we have some time to dive into this reading, and we'll save that little piece towards the end. It's very different from what I just talked about, and a pretty powerful piece of evidence there. So I want to make sure I leave that with you guys at the end. And I think we are good to go and jumping in the story. So this is going to be Genesis chapter 7. All right. Well, I gotta get to it. It's a good thing it's easy to find. And we're just going to start reading. Probably going to take this a verse at a time at the beginning, because there's going to be a few things to talk about, and then we'll just kind of start taking it in bigger chunks. So with that said, let's go ahead and, you know what? I can't even see what you guys are saying. So let me get that up so I can make sure I can. If you guys have any questions or want to jump in at any point in time, feel free to do so. And when I've got a moment, I will definitely engage with you guys. It'll be fun. So anyways, let's go ahead and start the reading. When everything was ready, the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the boat with all your family, for among all the people of the earth, I can see that you alone are righteous." Ooh, that's a pretty good statement. To hear that from God among all the peoples of the earth, you alone are righteous. Now, we touched on this a little bit last week, where there's he mentions about Noah being blameless, at least in comparison to everybody else. And so we have a couple different things you could take from this. Now, if you were to ask any pastor or most Christians about this, you say, well, does that mean that he didn't sin up to this point? They would all tell you, well, of course he's sinned up to this point. He's human, and he's clearly living a life where he is repentant towards God. He's probably maybe the only person who's still practicing, giving sacrifices to God for his sins, that sort of thing. We will see that that system has been established at this point in time in history. And then, so maybe he's the only one who's still striving for the Lord, and God is counting him righteous for his faith, not because he's never sinned. Or the other perspective of that is part of the drama of the play. Keep in mind that there is a promised savior to come from the woman who will destroy Satan. And we have a potential candidate here in Noah. We have someone who's upright, who is, counted as righteous in God's eyes. And who knows, maybe he's going to be this one. In the text, so far they haven't showed us in any way that he sinned. And we know in the full story of the Bible, the one thing that has to happen for Satan to be judged and for evil to be judged in the world is there has to be a human that has lived a blameless life. And we get the rest of that evidence all the way into Revelation. But that is essentially the drama of the play with Satan's arc here. He's trying to make sure everyone sins so he can't be judged. And we have someone here who might be a candidate for that. That's the other way of looking at this. So either way, we'll go ahead and keep going and see if the story shows that Noah does have faults, and we'll come across that maybe potentially, but not in this chapter. It's going to focus on something else. So let's go ahead and continue the reading. Take with you 7 pairs, male and female, of each animal I have approved for eating and for sacrifice, and take 1 pair of each of the others. You might be thinking, well, I thought he only took 2 of every animal. That's the Sunday school version. The actual version here is he took 2 of every animals except for the clean animals. He took 7 of those, or 7 pairs of those. And that's so that they would have, things that they could sacrifice, and of course they could eat from the animals that they had sacrificed and stuff as well. So it kind of provided food and things like that. Let's see here. Julian, those are pretty crazy facts about the possible evidence of a flood. The fossil facts was super interesting, and never thought about why they were found in that way. I know, it's crazy, right? Like, you see Jurassic Park, and I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, why is it in that position? And when doing a little bit of research, it's actually pretty crazy. So they couldn't have the theory of the asteroid hitting the Earth and then everything just suffocated. Well, they say that because we've found some pretty big meteors, and they're in the position as if they suffocated. But if an animal just dies on top of the ground and that's it, then they're not going to turn to a fossil, right? They have to be rapidly buried. And so there's clearly some kind of crazy flooding happening to cause these fossils to exist. Whether that's a global flood or local floods over time, over millions of years, you decide. But let's go ahead and dive back into this. I appreciate that. That's really good to point out. Let's see here. So we've got this system right here. So there's clearly a system of sacrifice that has been established at this point. And I will say it's also very nice that it shouldn't even have to bring this up, but it's very clear what male and female is. And the universal definition of this is the female is the body who produces the egg, and the male is the body that produces it's the best way to say it here on YouTube, the fertilizing agent for that egg. And, the body is designed for those two things, have those distinctions, male and female. It's a good thing they have those clear distinctions, because, if you mess that up, then you wouldn't have any of these animals anymore. So, we'll go ahead. I think that's pretty much it right there. So we don't know to the extent of how much of God's law that we see later established through Moses, where he gets into a lot of details. It's written in Exodus and Deuteronomy and things like that. We don't know how much of that was revealed back here, but clearly something off script. God has given them some kind of understanding of sacrifice, clean and unclean animals, and a whole system for, essentially for their sins, or for their sins to be forgiven, right? And the reason the animals have to be sacrificed, if someone, to make sure people understand this, is that the universal law, right, that sin, the penalty for sin is death. So something has to die, and that's the best workaround God had for not just killing Adam and Eve and wiping out the human race the moment that they sin. Like the best thing to do was to have something else take the place of it, so that God's plan through humanity could happen and Satan wouldn't get the W, if that makes sense. So yes, it's a necessary but sad thing that the animals have to be sacrificed and the system is established, but it's a good thing what it does for us. So let's go ahead and continue into the next part. All right. Also take 7 pairs of every kind of bird. There must be a male and a female in each pair to ensure that all life will survive on the earth after the flood. Once again, making that very clear. 7 days from now, I will make the rains pour down on the earth, and it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created. Well, we're going to hear a little bit later in the text where he defines what he means by all living things. Pretty much everything that doesn't live in the ocean. Now, obviously, a lot of ocean life would die in this event as well, but God took the responsibility of preserving ocean life, did not put that responsibility on Noah here. He was just supposed to take care of, preserve the animals, the birds, that sort of thing. So, yeah. And let's see here. I think that's pretty much all there is to say on that part. Let me review my notes. All right, let's see. All right, so story so far, I want to talk to you guys about this. The story so far and how the world is set up. Now keep this in mind. He's talking about rain, and it hasn't described rain happening yet up to this point. So the picture that the story has created so far is that there is this ice dome around the earth, or basically the great body of water equivalent to the ocean is up in the air, up in the sky, surrounding and creating some kind of greenhouse effect, which would be putting pressure on the atmosphere. Everything would grow faster, everything would be a more temperate climate, the whole world would be far more rich and abundant with life, let's just say that. And because of that, you would also not have rain in the traditional sense. The water cycle would happen, but the clouds wouldn't be able to get up off the ground because of all the pressurization of the air. So you would have a mist watering everything. And that actually checks out with what the story says. It says a mist, in fact, is what waters everything every morning. So yeah, a pretty nice system at this point. Now, as Noah is being tasked with this, he would have no doubt caught the attention of his neighbors, if you know what I mean. He's building a massive boat. I do believe I still have the picture here. I can show you guys. This is basically a replica of the ark, according to what the Bible talks about here. And yeah, if you were building this, the neighbors would notice, and especially if you were building it over the extensive period of time that he was building this over. I think it took him well over 100 years. And yeah, it's a pretty incredible thing, but he's also building a giant boat on dry ground. They probably thought he was crazy, and he probably kept telling them. He was probably crazy old Noah, going around telling people there's going to be rain, there's going to be a flood, I'm building a boat. And I'm sure he was a laughingstock for that. I'm sure people were not listening to him. And yeah, could you imagine being that, seen as that kind of a crazy guy? All right. So wait, no rainbows, no rainbows yet. There would have been no rainbows yet. You're absolutely right. With no clouds coming off the ground and producing rain in the traditional sense, yeah, you would actually have a lack of rainbows. So very good thing to point out there, Dan. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, that is 100% correct. So yeah, and also important to the story. So very nice, very nice. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and go to I think let's go ahead and go to the next part. So yeah, just keep this image in mind. Crazy old Noah building a massive boat, and yeah, so we'll see what happens next. Was he crazy after all? Let's see. We're next part. Let's go through 5 through 12. I think that'll give us a good chunk to talk about. All right. So Noah did everything as God commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood covered the earth. He went on board to the He went on board the boat to escape the flood. He and his wife and his sons and their wives. With them were all the various kinds of animals, those approved for eating and for sacrifice, and those that were not, along with all the birds and all the small animals that scurried along the ground. They entered the boat in pairs, male and female, just as God had commanded Noah. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 7th day of the 2nd month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. The rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. All right, so considering what we know so far, now suddenly there is rain. So what does that mean is happening here? In addition to this little detail, we also get the water fell in mighty torrents. Now, if you actually look at the original language that's being used there, the picture that it's describing is literally massive rivers falling out of the sky. So how could you get massive rivers falling out of the sky? Well, the only thing to explain that would be this water canopy that was put over the earth is now being brought down, and it's coming down in the form of massive rivers, torrents of water. Imagine the destructive force of this. I mean, that would probably be enough force from something like that to level a mountain. This is not a casual, light, slow rain buildup. This is a very, very violent event. And even if someone else had built a boat, it would be very unlikely that anyone in a boat could actually survive this event without God's direct intervention, as must have been the case here with Noah, because even with Noah's boat, he shouldn't have been able to survive this and by the natural means of what's happening here. So you have water bursting out from underground, which means that the tectonic plates are moving violently at this point and breaking apart. You probably had volcanic activity. You probably had, massive, hot water blasting out of the earth, water coming out of the sky in rivers, and now it's actually raining. So this would be pretty crazy stuff to actually be witnessing, and very, very devastating. There'd be no way that anything could survive this. Just try to paddle around or swim long enough or stay on a raft. There would be no way. And because of how violent it is, it's probably important to not think of it as a bunch of clear water just kind of building up. You're probably, if you're stirring up that much sediment, if the earth is opening up and you have water coming down so hard that it's hitting the ground like that, it's probably looking a whole like brown, the water, instead of like clear water or blue water that you would normally think of. I mean, a lot of sediment is being churned up and mixed up in this moment, which would give an ample amount of material to start laying down sediment, as potentially this could have been happening over days as it's slowly climbing over the surface of the earth that's dry, and one tsunami event after another tsunami event. And you would also explain why animals would be trying to get away from it and would be caught all in one spot, and you would have these massive fossilized animal graveyards. All that stuff kind of lines up pretty well. And then with all that fresh layers of sediment formed up and the movement of the tectonic plates, you would have a lot of that sediment bending and moving to where when it does harden, you have a bunch of bent sediment all over the place. Pretty crazy stuff there. Yeah, it is. Very nice. If you need a boat, I know a guy. Very, very clever. This guy with the ringer. Very nice. Okay. So, yeah, I think that's probably the best thing to talk about with that. So let me look at my notes real here. Yeah, so let's go ahead and read the next section right here because, yes, there's more to what's going on here. So let's go ahead and jump right into that. This will be 13 through 16. That very day, Noah had gone into the boat with his wife and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. With them in the boat were pairs of every kind of animal, domestic and wild, large and small, along with birds of every kind. 2 by 2 they came into the boat, representing every living thing that breathes. A male and female of each kind entered, just as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord closed the door behind them. Ooh, that last part. Now, before we talk about that last part, I do want to mention that it has been, one of the objections to this, if you will, is that clearly you wouldn't be able to get elephants and T-Rexes and all these massive animals, even into that really large boat. You know, we've got this thing right here. Even on something this massive, I mean, if you were going to have a lot of those large animals on here, that would present a problem. Well, the Bible doesn't say the age of these animals that are being brought over to the ark, but if God was reasonable and smart in this situation, and I think it's safe to assume that he would have brought young versions of all these animals. He would have had young elephants. He would have had young, big lizards and things like that, all the different animals that are out there. And so they would have to, the benefits of that is that they would eat less while they're on the ark. They would take up less space. It'd be easier to manage and control. And then also there'd be less animal dropping, so less work on the humans that are in there. And then they would also have a much longer lifespan to reproduce and fill the earth with life again after the flood. So the story doesn't directly say, but I think it's safe to assume reasonably that they were young animals that were brought into the ark. And then if you did that, you would in fact be able to fill this thing up with those animals. And yeah, so it's not every breed of an animal, but a pair of every kind, if that makes sense. So you have a lot of different animals that can come from a canine, right? You have a lot of different little breeds of those animals. So we don't have to bring all those breeds, just the species, if you will. It's probably the closest thing to describe it. A pair of every species. And yeah, so let's go ahead and take that off real quick. Oh, well, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. There we go. Oh, yeah. So let's talk about this last part then. It's very interesting. It says, then the Lord closed the door behind them. Now, why? There's a couple things. It could be that the design of the ark was just simply that it wasn't built to have a door that Noah could close. I don't know why you would build a door that way. It doesn't specify that he had to build a door that way. But maybe he built the door that way. So in faith, God would be the one to close it when it was time and ready. Or it could be that, I think this is a more reasonable view of this. Keep in mind, Noah had probably been a laughing stock for many hundreds of years for building this boat. Everyone knew old, crazy Noah, right? And I'm sure Noah probably had many conversations telling them to repent, telling them to turn back to God because there was going to be this crazy catastrophic event. The end of the world is coming. He was that guy. And, well, when it starts to flood, when it starts to rain, when things start getting crazy, where do you think all those people would go? I'm sure all those people would start saying, hey, I know a guy, right? Yeah, right there. Yeah, I need a boat and I know a guy. Thank you, this guy. And they probably would have started running over there trying to climb on board. which if you think about this scene, is probably a very heartbreaking scene. And it could have been that Noah just didn't have the heart or the ability to close it himself, that everyone's trying to get in and God had to be the one to shut the door. It's very likely, very possible. So yeah, just kind of goes to show that, and this is very consistent with the nature of God as described in the Bible. There is up to a certain point that God will appeal to you. He'll try to woo you. He'll try to convince you, win you over. But at a certain point in time, he turns you over to your sins, as it's described in the Bible. And we see this with, figures like Pharaoh, where Pharaoh hardens his heart over and over and over again. And then God starts hardening his heart so that he can just be glorified by destroying Pharaoh. And that's kind of a meant to represent the choice we all have at the end of the day. So God is closing the door. The opportunity is done. And now it's time for judgment. And there's also echoes to this in the book of Revelation on how things will be in the end of days. So yeah, once again, said it before, I'll say it again. God's serious about this stuff, but he's not doing this gleefully. He's not doing this out of spite. He's not laughing and pointing like, "Ha, you sinners." No, we read in the last chapter that his heart is broken. Like, God is terribly sad about all of this, and it's something that has to be done because he's just. Yeah, so crazy stuff. Very interesting image right there. All right, this guy, chivalry did not die. Very nice. Let's see. Let's go ahead. I think we're just going to jump into, we'll probably just jump into the rest of it here. Yeah, 17 through 24. Let's go ahead and cover that. For 40 days, the floodwaters grew deeper, covering the ground and lifting the boat high above the earth. As the waters rose higher and higher above the ground, the boat floated safely on the surface. Finally, the water covered even the highest mountains on the earth. That's how you know it's worldwide. Rising more than 22 feet above the highest peaks. All the living things on the earth died. Birds, domestic animals, wild animals, small animals that scurry along the ground, and all the people. Everything that breathed and lived on dry land died. God wiped out every living thing on the earth. People, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and the birds of the sky, all were destroyed. The only people who survived were Noah and those with him in the boat. And the floodwaters covered the earth for 150 days. 5 months. Yeah, I'd say it's a long time. So for 5 months, you have these crazy events happening with the floodwaters to, create those things that were presented as evidence earlier. So yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff. Now, keep this in mind as well, because there's so much movement of tectonic plates, that doesn't necessarily mean when it says the water was over the highest mountain, that was specifically Mount Everest at the time. With the way that the earth is being reshaped here, it could have been that the highest mountain wasn't actually that high at that time, that Mount Everest was kind of built out of this, or maybe elevated at some point in time through tectonic shifting. But yeah, I mean, regardless, it's saying the water went over the highest mountain. So it's a really difficult thing to say, at least in being consistent with the story as the picture is being described, to say that it was a local flood, right? The story is creating the picture of a global flood. So if you believe that there's a different knowledge, let's see here, make sure our connection is good. All right, I think we had a pause in connection. That's right. I'm sure it'll pop back up. All right. Well, we'll just keep going. So let's see here. Yeah. So anyways, that's the picture that the story is creating. And since we're here to cover the story, that's what we're going to say is happening here. And additional to that, so what about the fish? Well, it makes it clear in here that things are dying, or what's on land. Once again, the fish would have had a massive blow to their populations, but God is somehow, some way, basically preserving their life, right? We still see and hear. Okay, good. All right, so it's just a glitch on the little YouTube app then. All right, perfect. Well, let's go ahead. We're going to go ahead and start heading back to Earth. And while we do that, I would like to talk to you guys about one thing that's pretty cool here. Now, I do want to say this as well. You know what? Yeah, we'll get into that as we go back to the front of the ship. We usually have some time to kill as we go back to Earth. So let's cover some more stuff as we do that. So here I'm trying to make sure we hit the right thing here. All right, Wilson. All right, let's turn this thing around. All right. So Wilson, you're a little slow on getting the ship turned around this time. Okay, let's see. Sure. Yeah. All right, there she is. There's Mars. Let's see here. This guy, saltwater animals may have been affected due to freshwater filling, right? Well, we don't know what if the water that was coming out of the sky, if it was freshwater or not, or if it was the water coming out from underneath the ground. We don't know if it was freshwater. May have actually been just as salty as the ocean. So here's an interesting thing about that, though. So every saltwater animal, not every saltwater animal can acclimate to fresh water. But it turns out that every freshwater animal can actually slowly acclimate back to salt water. So that could kind of explain why you got freshwater fish. All of them have a saltwater fish ancestor. And that's why you can have bass, that are the same species, found in lakes all over the world, then some that aren't even like connected to the ocean. And that's because if you had a worldwide flood and the animals were disseminated like that, the ones that were trapped in places that would become freshwater, the ones that couldn't acclimate would die off, while the ones that could would become freshwater fish. So that's really interesting there. But yeah, I mean, if it's the Bible makes it very mysterious on how God preserved the life of the ocean animals while this was happening. I would imagine it could have been God preserved a section, I don't know. It'd be something to explore. But yeah, I don't know. Who knows what the state of the water coming out of the sky was, or coming out from the ground. Could have very easily been salt water as well. So yeah, interesting stuff, right? Interesting stuff. Let's see here. Now, I do want to say, if you do want to be a bit of a biblical scholar and look up other places in the Bible that talk about a worldwide flood, or at least this event, you do have Psalm 104, 5 through 9, and 2 Peter 3, 5 through 6. And if you actually go to those verses, those are two other places in the Bible that, when referring to this, refer to it as a global phenomenon, or at least seems to add to the validity of that idea. So once again, keeping the narrative arc intact so far as that is concerned. So let's see here. Let's go ahead. Well, so we should probably be going back to Earth right now. I think we could do that right here. You always want me to. You could have plotted this. You don't have to have me plot it. I know I call myself captain, but anyways, all right. Well, Wilson wants me to take some responsibility as captain here. All right. How did I do, Wilson? We good? All right, perfect. So let's conclude with this. So if this happens, now reasonably and logically, if all people here came from Noah and his family, well, surely this story would have been passed down, right? It would be kind of wild if, like, a couple generations later, no one's talking about it. So what do people all over the earth, what do ancient legends and stuff talk about? Do they talk about a worldwide flood? Here we go. Let's lock in so we don't, enter the atmosphere. There we go. So I do want to share this with you guys. This is actually very, very interesting. I did not know this up until recently, and I found this to be probably the most convincing thing for me to add validity to the idea of a worldwide flood. And before I talk about this, one of the best evidences that you can have is witnesses to something. You know, if something occurred or happened and you have multiple different sources saying, yeah, this thing happened, then it's, you know, what must be true because you have different sources saying it. Such as the idea of the city of Troy. This was considered to be just a legend or a myth for a long time, because there was only one thing that was talking about it, at least one thing that we found in history talking about it, and that's Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. But then we started finding some Egyptian and other sources that also referred to the Trojan War happening, and you know, separate thing or separate sources all talking about the same event. So now it's accepted that the city of Troy was real, that there was a Trojan War that happened, and surely it may have not happened exactly the way Homer told it, but it was is now considered an actual historical place and event. So once again, the bar for whether something is historically accurate or not is if there are multiple different things talking about it. And check this out. So I want to read this to you guys. And this is something I guess Boyce compiled together, a theologian and historian who's basically done a lot of research on this. So let's talk about this. So specifically cites that there are over 200 cultures that have their own account of the flood, and the following aspects of the story have a commonality to them. And I want to read off some of these different cultures that have these flood stories. And I'm probably going to butcher some of these names, but I want you to just kind of think about where these are at in the world. Is it all just happening around the Middle East or not? So listen to this. The Samo-Kudo tribe of New Guinea, the Athapascan Indians of America, the Papago Indians of Arizona, the Brazilian tribes, the Peruvian Indians, African Hottentots, natives of Greenland, native Hawaiian Islanders, Hindu, Chinese, Egyptians, Greeks, Persians, Australian natives, the Welsh, Celts, Druids, Siberians, and Lithuanians. That is just to name some of these cultures that have flood legends in their stories. And when you actually look at these flood legends, this is the commonalities between them. 88% of them describe a favored family. 70% of them attribute the survival to a boat. 95% say the sole cause of the catastrophe is a flood. 66% say that the disaster is due to man's wickedness. 67% record that animals are also saved. 57% describe that the survivors end up on a mountain, which we haven't gotten there in the story yet, but that is part of the biblical story. And many of these accounts also specifically mention birds being sent out, a rainbow, and 8 persons being saved. And if you want to know another source for this, is the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is the oldest written story that we have recovered. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, there is a point in the story where Gilgamesh, and we've talked about it before. I think do I still have a picture? No, I don't have a picture from here. We talked about it before last week, and towards the end of the story, when he's discovering that he's going to die one day because he is mortal, and he's wrestling with his mortality. It says that he travels to the end of the earth to find the guy who built the boat and basically survived the flood that had wiped out all of humanity. And the guy has this really long name. I should have written it down. But there's a character in the story who has survived the flood and saved all the animals and humanity by building a boat. So once again, that is... I would say a lot of different sources confirming relatively the same thing. Now, you could say, well, it's just a local flood. Well, the thing that's unreasonable about that is that we're talking about cultures all over the earth sharing very similar facts about this one event, which is exactly what you would see if in fact there was a worldwide flood that had occurred at some point in time. You would have a lot of ancient legends and myths that refer to this event, and you would see not perfect commonality between them because people's stories change over time, and people have different perspectives when they hear a story and how they retell them. So different legends and the way that they're told is something that would obviously be an outcome of that. But the very fact that that is even the case combined with all those other things that we referred to, and there's many other things to combine with that, I would say is both reasonable and fairly logical to assert, or at least to believe, that a worldwide flood did occur on the earth, and give some validity to this story in the Bible here, which is pretty cool stuff. Once again, I'm not going to sit here and say that's proof, and I'm not going to tell you what you should believe about it, but that's definitely something that when you hear someone say there's no evidence, and you definitely hear some people say that stuff, there's no evidence, you're ridiculous for believing this stuff. Well, here you go. You're not ridiculous for believing it. It's actually very reasonable and logical when you start looking at all these different things. So I wanted to share that with you guys. I thought that would be kind of fun to go over. And once again, you should always do your own research on any of these types of things. But at the end of the day, this story is clearly pretty impactful and pretty interesting stuff. So Daniel, sounds reasonable to me. Yeah, I would say it sounds pretty reasonable. So with that, I think that we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here. Look at that. We're all within an hour. Nailed it this time. Next week, we will be going over, I think we might be getting to whether or not to answer that question about, did Noah actually sin in the story at some point in time? Is he perfect or not? We will be covering that very soon. And yeah, so we'll get more of the story of what happens at the end of this flood and with the rest of Noah and his family. So yeah, with that, if you guys are good, I guess we'll wrap it up there. And yeah, once again, I appreciate you guys checking out the show. Be sure to hit that like if you like it. Be sure to hit that subscribe and notification bell so you don't miss out on the shows. Try to post it at least like an hour or 45 minutes before the show starts so you guys get a little notification of it happening. And then, yeah, be sure to share it. Once again, our goal here is to reach out to all the world over here and get everyone on board so we can all have these shared stories, at least give back to you these stories that do in fact belong to you and all of humanity. And the more that we do that kind of stuff together, the more that we can fight back against all the chaos that is happening in the world right now. So yeah, with that, I will let's go ahead and hit that outro, Wilson, and I'll catch you guys later.